constant feeling reigns over the 130-plus year history of NC State Wolfpack football. Hope. And when there's hope, well, Pack fans can always relate. Pack family, time for a true look at your team. Expert analysis, special guests, and a Carter Finley-sized bag full of X's and O's. Let's get hooked up for Pack Therapy. Here are your hosts, Tim Donnelly and Wolfpack great Mike Glennon.
Another edition of Pack Therapy, preseason number 2 episode. Can't wait to start talking about games. But first, we have to set the table. Just like last week, we set the table with the offense. Today, we're talking defense. A couple of quarterbacks talking defense.
Tell you what, that intro music kind of gets you fired up, like you're ready to run out of the tunnel.
Yeah, I feel like it's the point where, actually, speaking defense and we're being quarterbacks, where the defense is like smacking each other and getting really jacked up, and you're on the outside of the huddle going like, whoa, all right, these guys are really, really fired up. The quick story, our defense used to chant, time to eat, time to kill. I don't know why. That was at the University of Delaware. One guy would yell time to eat, and everyone else would yell time to kill, like if you want to eat something. And every once in a while, someone would look at me and be like, time to eat. And I'd be like, time to kill. It was always super awkward for a quarterback to be involved. So that's a little bit of the difference between defense and offense, right? We talked about offense. It was super analytical. It was super deep down in the Robert and I offense and what will they do for the scheme. Defense, especially when it comes to State this year, I think it's kind of about just having the dogs, right? It's you were sending me over some stuff about the Senior Bowl watch list and quite a few, not just defense but offensive players, but there's some dogs that have NFL talent, NFL ability, and what does that do for a defense when you have guys like Davin Vann, when you have guys like Payton Wilson who are not just productive but also, if you put them on an athletic decathlon, they're going to do pretty darn well.
Yeah, I think this defense is kind of getting overlooked at how much production they lost last year. They lost Drake Thomas, Isaiah Moore, Tanner Engel, but when you look at the whole, they have a lot of guys returning and guys that have played a lot of football. And the biggest thing when I kind of look at this depth chart of all the returning players, who they have, who their star players are that are on the Senior Bowl watch list, it's at the corner position, it's at that defensive line position, and that brings me to the NFL. When you find guys in the NFL who get paid the most on defense, what positions are they? They're defensive line and they're the cornerbacks. So if there's two areas where you're fine with replacing guys, it's at that linebacker position, it's at that safety position, which, by the way, they still are returning Payton Wilson. So they're good. Their strengths are at the most important position on the field. So I feel good about this defense, and I think there's a lot to be excited for with Tony Gibson and this crew returning.
It's funny because I realized it obviously, but I hadn't put the emphasis on it like you just did about the corners, Aydan White, Shaheem Battle, some of those edge rushers as you brought up, Vann being kind of the most freakiest of the athletes. The ACC, we were at ACC kickoff, and you can read all of the preview stuff. This year is very much a year where the quarterbacks are featured and hyped up, and everybody wants to talk about this pro prospect and this dark horse Heisman and all those sorts of things. When you're going up against a legit wide receiver core and quarterback every week, Tony Gibson has to be thanking his lucky stars that he has guys to get after those quarterbacks and make them uncomfortable, and corners that aren't afraid to be out there on an island.
Exactly, because it frees you up as a play caller, as a defensive play caller, that, okay, we feel comfortable with the corners we got. We might not want to live putting them on an island, but if we have to, we can just play man coverage and trust that our guys are going to lock them down, and we can just rush four, and we can get home with doing that. So we can mix it up in so many different ways. We can bring the pressures, which Tony Gibson loves to do. We can rush just with a couple guys because we have guys that can get home in Davin Vann and in Savion Jackson, and there's other guys that have proven to be able to rush the passer. Payton Wilson being one of them, or we could drop back into max zone coverage like they did against Carolina at times, and it allows him to call the game plan any way he wants to go.
Before we get into the nitty gritty of this year, I do want to be fair. if you listen to our first episode of this season of Pack Therapy, I started it because we were talking about the offense with, hey, the defense was the leading defense in points allowed in the ACC. The offense, you still only ended up winning X amount of games. What happened on the offense? So I want to kind of in the interest of fairness to state, not only ask what happened when it's not great, I want to ask what happens when it is great. Last year, top 20 defense in the country, 19.2 points allowed, 326.9 yards per game allowed. To be fair, what happened last year? Why were they so good?
They were so good because Tony Gibson has a great scheme, this 3-3-5 defense. We talked about it last week, that Dave Doran wants to have coordinators that are tough game plan. He can do it all. Out of that 3-3-5, as a quarterback, when you get like a 4-down vanilla front, they just play cover 1, cover 2. You walk in on Sunday or Monday and you see what they do. You're like, this is gonna be easy prep week. Now on the flip side, sometimes you get really good at what you do, and some simplicity.
It's an execution thing though, rather than like I have to like you said, like I don't have to be in film all week. I just have to do what we do and get our beaters done
then
correctly.
It's about just executing better than them. But when you have a defense like Tony Gibson who mixes it up, it causes confusion, and it causes that the preparation for they could come so many different ways with those 3 linebackers. They can play so many different coverages. They can drop 8. They can play cover 0. I mean, he does it all, which makes it hard on coaches. It makes it hard on the quarterback. At the same time, if you do too much, that can cause for a slip up on the defensive end, and it can lead to some wide open guys. So there's that fine line between doing too much or being too simple. But it starts with Tony Gibson. Mm-hmm. That's what this defense is very good because of him. They had some really good playmakers. I mean, talk about those linebackers. It was the best linebacker core in the ACC. Drake Thomas hopefully will make the Raiders. I know he had a good preseason game last week, but he's a phenomenal college player, just a little on the undersized.
Oh, I mean, over 100 tackles, 7.5 sacks. Like sometimes the stats don't tell the story. Sometimes it does. Like that's really good.
Exactly. And then Payton Wilson is clearly a dominant player.
When healthy.
Yes, when healthy. I mean, this guy's violent. He's got great closing speed. I mean, it seems like he just swallows the quarterback. So between him and then Aydan White on the outside, obviously had a great year as well. So they did have the playmakers. The scheme is good, and I think that's what is so positive is they can take what they did last year and keep going this year.
Here's you brought it up already because because I do this for a living, I read a lot, and I'm in all the previews and everything. The number one thing you hear about the NC State defense is about all of the lost production on defense, right? The 5 of the top 6 leading tacklers, you brought up some of them, Drake Thomas, Isaiah Moore, Tanner Engel, no longer with them. But one thing I've kind of focused on and latched onto is the guys that are replacing him. It's not like they had to go hit the portal, right? It's not like they're depending on some stud freshman or somebody new. When it comes to Gibson's defense, there are at least guys that have been in the meeting room. So I think they're going to be able to, or you'd expect them to be able to, stay with the multiple defenses and stay with all the different looks and not have that drop off in guys that don't know what they're doing. Because like you said, when you try to do a lot, it only takes one guy to not know where he's supposed to be, and then there's a seam that's wide open, and that ruins all your hard work. The familiarity with the defense, I think, is going to be crucial, which is going to allow those dogs, right, those freaky athletes to go out and do all the crazy things that they like to do.
Yeah, I think when I called the NC State spring game and I met with Tony Gibson, Dave Doran, and that's exactly what they echoed is everyone's talking about our loss of production, but what they don't realize is we have guys that maybe aren't technically returning starters, but they've played a lot of football because of injuries to Payton Wilson, to Isaiah Moore. Devin Betty was the guy they brought up, has played a lot of linebacker. Jalen Scott, another linebacker that has played a lot, a senior. Devin Betty's a junior. And then they got guys like Sean Brown as safety. Devin Boykin also playing safety, had an interception against Florida State. These are guys that have played. And then they did bring in one transfer in Robert Kennedy, the nickel out of ODU, who they love. This was in the spring. But the exact quote from Tony Gibson was, the best thing about a DB is if you never notice him in practice, because that means he's in good coverage and does all the things right. That just means they're not thrown at him. He's playing in good coverage, and you never see him getting beat. So I feel really good about this defense. They have the experience. They have kind of the star power with Payton Wilson, with Davin Vann, with Aydan White, and then they have a bunch of guys that have been around the program, have seen it through. They've watched Drake Thomas and those guys, and now it's just their time. They've been waiting a while, and they'll be ready to go.
I want to hone in on a couple of the guys, the studs we've been talking about. It actually goes right along with what you said about Tony Gibson. Aydan White burst onto the scene last year, right? He was a backup the year before, a couple of starts in spots, right? Kind of like what you were saying, where he wasn't exactly coming in with no experience, but he hadn't been one of the dudes the year before. First team All ACC, according to PFF, all right, and some stats, you can twist numbers. He played the most coverage snaps in the nation of anyone who allowed 0 touchdowns in 2022. That's 482 coverage snaps. None of them ended with a touchdown by the guy he was responsible for. As a quarterback, you avoiding him? Are you I know the defense tells you where to go, and sometimes you have to challenge them, but is he circled on the scouting report with if you can go the other way?
I think that's what it's labeled at. I don't think he's a Darrelle Revis, Richard Sherman in his prime, where it's kind of like, hey, we're not going. We're working the other side of the field. But I think it may be, hey, we got 2 mirrored routes where they're running the same route. 2 fades, 2 go routes. Let's stay away from Aydan White on this one. Maybe we should test Shaheen Battle. So I think that's more of what it will be, and it might be, to your point, like in the red zone, this guy's not giving up many touchdowns. We might need to go away from him, and that might be on the play caller. But he'll definitely be circled, starred when they're going over that scouting report at the beginning of the week.
So Shaheen Battle, that obviously, everyone that's been on a football team knows that if the corner's being tested a lot, they might end up with the most PBUs, the most interceptions, but it's not really a compliment, right? It's kind of the opposing team saying, you were the one we were trying to attack. With Aydan White on one side, Shaheen Battle, a lot of football last year, made some the Florida State interception sticks out before he was ejected for targeting. Is he ready to be kind of the guy that's tested more often if you have an outside receiver that they want to get the ball to?
Yeah, I think you bring up a great point that at the end of this year we might actually see bigger numbers from Shaheen than we do from Aydan. But I think he's more than capable. It's not like this is like a weakling. I mean, he could easily be a guy that's kind of starred as well. So he's got good ball skills. He's good in man coverage. So if people want to test him, they can, and I think they'll find out that he's not a weak link at all. It's just that Aydan White is kind of coming in with a lot of the hype, and we'll see as the season goes how teams plan to attack them.
I'm a nerd for mock drafts. I'm a nerd for big boards. Aydan White not really on the at least the. Who knows if he's actually on the big boards inside NFL, GM's office and war rooms, because all we have is access to the quote-unquote experts and analysts. Why isn't Aydan White really on any of those lists, knowing that he's a guy who, just like there's multiple Florida State corners on everybody's list, and it's like, wait a second, Aydan White outproduced all of them in the same conference last year. Is there something about him that isn't NFL?
I'm not sure. We'll see more now that he's kind of established himself, and for him, he shouldn't be worried about that. Sometimes it's good to kind of fly under the radar, and you can see what happens. Sometimes if you're known too much, it can actually backfire you, because then they just start finding things to kind of nitpick, where maybe he's a guy that's kind of flying under the radar now and then bursts on the scene, and they're not finding ways not to draft you. Sometimes they just, over time, they see too much of you. I mean, the first person that comes to mind is Sam Howell. You saw him the other day. I mean, he was projected as a first-round pick. Then all of a sudden, for whatever reason, they just find ways to start criticizing you, and clearly what he showed the other night shows that he probably should have been picked higher. But that can happen to guys. It's a real thing about playing too much.
This is the point where every GM or scout that didn't, say you had Josh Allen or Patrick Mahomes, you start hearing, I had Sam Howell as a late first. I don't know how he fell. We just didn't need him. Right? Everybody goes and lies because it makes them look better.
But so to me, it doesn't matter. I kind of get sucked into those mock drafts too, just to kind of keep my eyes out for people. But as we know, every year that first-round mock draft that Todd McShay comes out with to what actually ends up happening, it's like half the list actually gets drafted in the first round, and then there's about a quarter of the list that ends up going in the late rounds to undrafted. I mean, there's times where a guy might even go undrafted on those. So we can't get too caught up in that. I think he'll prove himself this year to scouts.
NFL does like, or again, minus the injuries, Payton Wilson. He's a guy who probably could have tested the professional ranks after last season, or I mean, if you really want to go back a little bit, he was really a stud when he led the league or led the ACC in tackles a couple years ago. The injuries have battled a bit, but you're not a doctor. This isn't a fair question. Can he stay healthy?
Yeah, I can't answer that one. Although I do know I've met Payton multiple times. He's a big guy, but I was on the field last year pregame for, I believe it was the Florida State game, and I saw him in pads. And I've been around a lot of NFL guys, and I'm like, that is a big-ass dude right there.
Tall as heck.
And, I mean, he's all of 6'4", 242 he's listed. I think it's legit.
It's the way I described him is he's built like the quarterback that you say is built like a linebacker. Like because even linebackers, right? They're big. Normally 6'1", 6'2". When you see like a Anthony Richardson or something, and they're 6'4", 6'5", 240, 250, you say like, oh wow, they're built like a linebacker. But in actuality, they're like a bigger version of, because most linebackers aren't 6'4", 6'5". He like when he walked through, I was like, he's either like a tight end, he's like a quarterback who's going to run for 1,200 yards. Oh no, wait, he's a linebacker and can run like a deer.
Yeah, he's what they want in the NFL because he's rangy, he's got that extremely high motor. I mean, he can do it all, but the best ability is availability, and he's got to be able to prove that he can stay healthy and stay on the field all year.
I'm going to give – this isn't even me. This is The Athletic, like the website, whatever, publication, put out a list of the 101 freakiest athletes in the country. So it's 101 college athletes. The number one is a South Carolina wide receiver who's a freshman who's 6'5", 232, and runs a 10.200.
Like Calvin Johnson?
I would never say that, but I'll send you a YouTube video of him running the 100 in high school, where everyone's up to his waist. They're all like half as wide as his shoulders are, and it's ridiculous. It looks so. Anyway, that's what they're judging. Payton Wilson, the 27th freakiest athlete in the country. I didn't realize this. Former standout lacrosse player. That makes a little bit of sense when you see some of the wiggle and to use who is it? Who is the GM of the Raiders that used to be the NFL Network guy?
Mike Mayock?
Mayock, right? Oily hips,
oh,
right?
Yes.
He's got the oily hips. State champion wrestler, listed at 6'4", 4.49 in the 40. He's been clocked according to The Athletic. 4.21 in the pro agility. Bench presses almost 400 at 390. Vertical jump 35.5. Broad jumped almost 10. Like he is one of those guys who Tony Gibson can do a lot with, right? You got to know where he is if you're the opposing team's quarterback, but he could come on a blitz. He could blitz the A gap. He could blitz off the edge. He could drop into coverage. He could run with a quick and fast tight end. What does that do for Gibson?
Yeah, again, it goes back to the beginning that these players allow Tony Gibson to call the game in any way he wants. They can have Payton Wilson play that true linebacker, off the ball, or they could line him up at more of a defensive end because of that 3-3-5. Sometimes they put a fourth guy down where he can rush the passer. A lot of times it seems like he's spying the quarterback, and when it's time to go, he goes. And what you said is he's the kind of guy as a quarterback, as a player, an offensive player, you step out on the field and you line up against him for the first time, you're like, whoa. I kind of hope that guy doesn't hit me today because it's going to be painful when he hits me. It's going to hurt tomorrow. So
it's a film thing too. When you see a couple of them, you're like, oh, okay, all right,
yeah,
I gotcha.
Yeah,
I'm aware.
Looks bigger than he does on film. So he brings a lot to this team. I know he's been around for a while. I know they said that he's become more of a vocal leader. He's kind of taken over this defense. He's matured over the years. And I thought it was impressive that he came back. Some guys just eventually kind of get tired of the
He's
college
been here a while.
grind and want to move on and just test it, which I completely respect, trying to get to the next level. But he wanted to come back. He felt like he had more to prove. I think he wants to prove that he can stay healthy. And for great reasons, NC State fans should be excited to see number 11 back.
Also on that athletic freak list, Number 40 is Davin Vann. So they had 3 of the top 101 freakiest. Jordan Houston on offense being one of them, but with this being the defensive emphasis pod, Davin Vann, another state champion heavyweight wrestler. So a couple of wrestlers, 278 pounds, third longest discus throw in the United States his senior year. That just seems ridiculous. Benching over 400, squatting 580, has run a sub 4.840 and vertical jumps 33 inches. Defensive end, it's a little different, right? It's not as much, as a quarterback, you know what side he's on, right? But you still just kind of have to trust your offensive line to take care of it. Is it truly just he's going to have to get to the quarterback, or what kind of other impact can you have?
Yeah, well, I think Davin Vann, and I almost don't even want to say this, but I'm going to say it, is the name that comes up, and this is not a fair fair comparison. This is like comparing
a freshman to Calvin Johnson 20 seconds ago.
But the style of play is probably a better way of saying it, is like Aaron Donald. He's got that. He's similar in size, 6'2", 272. Aaron Donald's not the biggest guy in the world compared to someone. I think he's about 6'1".
Fell to 10 or 11, whatever he did in the draft.
But Davin plays with such a big motor. He's got that great speed rush, and he kind of rips through. He's physical, and that's just the way that Aaron Donald plays. So, again, we're talking about maybe the best defensive player of all time, but it's
a style comparison, not a quality comparison.
Style is a great way of putting it. But that's the kind of player he is, and in that 3-3-5, yes, he's a defensive end, but at times he's kind of like a defensive tackle as well, where he's a little on the interior side. So you just listed off all the reasons why he's a freak. I know that they love him there, and that's what I'm talking about. Is his defense has a lot of players returning that forever weren't the featured star players last year, because everyone was talking about the linebackers and Drake Thomas, Payton, Isaiah Moore, for good reason. But there's other guys on this defense that are more than capable and should be playing on Sundays.
And a lot of times you talked about that 3-man front. When you have a 3-man front, sometimes that kind of sets up the linebackers to be the stat patters, because sometimes you're just occupying, right? You're taking up blockers, you're occupying gaps. So somebody like Vann, might not have the gaudiest stats. Just like, if you look at Aaron Donald is kind of the exception. Like a Derek Brown for the Panthers, right? He's not racking up massive amounts of stats, but you look at what the Panthers say about him, what all the guru, it's like, oh, he's one of the top 10 interior defensive guys in the league, and it's because he's occupying double teams and not getting pushed back.
Exactly. We talk about in the beginning of the show that where the guys get paid the most. I feel like every year there's a few defensive linemen that I see get paid, and they make a ton of money, and I'm like, I barely know that guy. But it's probably because he's not a big stats guy, but he's a guy that, like you're saying, he's got that gap integrity. He's taken up. He does exactly his job.
Doesn't move.
And he's more of like a point guard in a way, where he's helping the other guy make the play that no one on TV notices, but coaches love because they can count on him to do his job, and he helps the other 10 guys on the field.
Exactly. And linebackers love him the most because they get free runs, and they're not getting – guards chasing them in the second level because they're occupying them. So obviously Payton Wilson is going like, yeah, Van's my guy, right? That's kind of how that relationship works. A lot of hype should be. It's deserved because they're coming back as one of the best defenses in the country. Tony Gibson's system has been proven. Is there UConn, I don't know if they'll expose a ton. They're a program that's on the build, but that Notre Dame game is early on. Is there something in the first quarter that you're going to be like, hey, if this holds up, this defense is going to be legit? Meaning like not a concern, but a hey, we should make sure that's good before we let this hype get crazy.
I think for sure. If they play well against Notre Dame, offense, defense, anyone, of course it's going to be.
But it's like Aydan White, right? Even if he gives up a catch in the first quarter, you're like, I'm still pretty good, right? I still believe that's going to be a strength of the team. Is there anything that you want to almost confirm? Like, all right, let's make sure this is good before we let the hype get crazy.
It's a good question. I just have faith. I mean, and I think that starts with Dave Doran. I think it goes down to Tony Gibson, is that they've proven year after year to have good defenses, and there's a lot of people that are going to be on that field that have played a lot of football. So, Well, time will tell. I guess the biggest thing, is replacing those two linebackers. Is it good enough that Devin Betty, Jalen Scott have been around the program and have played some? I think Drake Thomas was a phenomenal football player for NC State. So I guess it will come down to those newcomers and maybe the hype. Is Aydan White as good as we think he is? Is Shaheem Battle? Are they as good as advertised? And I think a team like Notre Dame, they can expose your weaknesses pretty quickly. So I think that'll be the biggest tell is what are the weaknesses, and they'll quickly be able to find out.
Does the offense changing affect the defense at all? Bringing in new quarterback, new coordinator, and it's not going to be what they're used to, or maybe it will be, right? Robert and I, we still don't really know what bag of tricks he's going to pull out.
Yeah, I have a feeling that this offense is going to be a little bit more unleashed than it has been in the past. I think Dave is going to let Robert and I do his thing. We talked about it last week. Sometimes defensive-minded head coaches like to have an influence on the offensive game plan. And I just feel like Anai's been around. He's going to just let him go. And however that goes, it may be required, the defense, I mean,
we've all been there, right? A quick 3 and out, incomplete, and you're jogging off the field, and the defense is looking at you like, come on, man. It's hot out
it's not
here.
a good feeling when it's like, you're getting there to the sideline, and the defense is still catching their breath, and it's like.
They got towels over their head and stuff, and you're just like, man.
We need to go. But, yeah, I mean, that's just I feel like in the ACC and big-time college football now, I mean, it might be 30-plus point shootouts. And it's not going to be, the old school, low-scoring games where
protect the football and punt.
Right. I think this offense might be just unleashed, and this defense, obviously our offense has to score one more point than them, but instead of it being, 28-24, it might be a 35-31, and that extra, stop can be the difference in the game.
That's the defense preview here on Pack Therapy. Next week, Thursday. It's an early start. I'm excited. It's week 1. Week 0 is this weekend, but so we'll get a look at Notre Dame, a little bit of scouting for an early season game. But next week we'll be previewing UConn. Are we? Should we tease the guest, or should we let them know it's a big one?
We should.
We're working on some things. Just trust us. We're working on some things to open the season with a little bit of a bang here on Pack Therapy. So tune back in next week for that. Mike, appreciate it as always.
Great one, Tim. Enjoyed it.